I was staring at the twisted metal that used to be my car when the police officer asked me the question that would change everything. Ma'am, your brother claims you were driving. Can you confirm that? In my previous life, I would have nodded. I would have taken the blame, just like I always did. I would have gone to prison for vehicular manslaughter while Jake walked free, leaving behind the family of 4 he'd actually killed in his drunken rage. But not this time. No, officer, I said clearly, pulling out my phone. I have dashcam footage that will show you exactly who was driving. Jake's face went white. He didn't know about the camera I'd installed after being reborn 3 months ago with perfect memories of how this night was supposed to end. In my first life, I died in prison at 25, chivied by an inmate whose daughter had been killed by a drunk driver. The cosmic joke was that I'd never even had a drink in my life. But somehow, impossibly, I'd woken up on my 22nd birthday with 3 years to prepare for this moment. The officer took my phone, and I watched Jake's world crumble as the truth played out in high definition. There he was, clearly visible through the windshield, yanking the wheel from my hands when I'd tried to stop him from driving drunk. There was the moment he'd shoved me into the passenger seat, and there, most damning of all, was his face after the crash, not the face of a traumatized passenger, but of a guilty man calculating how to escape consequences. Growing up, Jake had been the golden child while I was the family scapegoat. When he stole money from Mom's purse, I got blamed. When he failed classes, somehow it was my fault for not tutoring him enough. When he wrecked Dad's car at 16, I was grounded for not being a better influence. The pattern was so ingrained that when the crash happened in my first life, the family didn't even question his story. Of course it was my fault. It was always my fault. But I'd learned something powerful in those 3 months since my rebirth. The truth, when properly documented, was unassailable. I'd spent my second chance meticulously preparing. I'd installed cameras everywhere, in my car, my apartment, even hidden ones in my purse. I'd opened a secret bank account and slowly moved my money where the family couldn't touch it. Most importantly, I'd started building relationships with people who actually cared about me, not the convenient family punching bag I'd always been. When Jake had called me that night, begging me to pick him up from the bar, I'd known exactly what was coming. In my first life, I'd arrived to find him already in my car, too drunk to be reasoned with, but not too drunk to be manipulative. "Come on, sis," he'd slurred. "You know I'm a better driver than you, even when I'm wasted." I'd tried to get the keys back, but he was bigger and stronger. The struggle for control had lasted only seconds before the impact that killed the Morrison family, 2 parents and their twin 8-year-old daughters coming home from a birthday party. This time, I'd been ready. I'd worn a wire. I'd had the dash cam running before I even started the car. And when he'd tried to force his way into the driver's seat, I'd let him, knowing that this time, the truth would speak louder than his lies. The police arrested Jake on the spot. The wire had captured him admitting he'd been drinking, threatening me, and even bragging about how he'd pin it on me, like always. The dashcam showed the entire sequence of events. There was no wiggle room, no family manipulation that could change the narrative. Within hours, our parents arrived at the station. Dad immediately started his usual routine. "Now, Sarah, I know you want to protect your brother, but taking the blame won't help anyone." "She's not taking the blame because she's not to blame," Detective Rodriguez interrupted, showing them the footage. "Your son is being charged with 4 counts of vehicular manslaughter, DUI, assault, and coercion." Mom's face crumpled. "But Jake said—" "Jake lied," I said simply, like he always does, like you always let him. The trial was a media sensation. The Morrison family's attorney had gotten hold of the dashcam footage, and it played on every news station in the state. My wire recording became evidence of a pattern of family abuse and scapegoating that had enabled Jake's increasingly dangerous behavior. During the trial, I learned things that made my blood run cold. This wasn't Jake's first time driving drunk. It was just his first time getting caught. There had been 3 other incidents I'd never known about, all covered up by our parents' money and influence. A hit and run that injured a cyclist, a crash into a storefront, a near miss with a school bus. Each time, they'd bought his way out of consequences. Each time, they'd told themselves it wasn't really his fault. And somehow, in their twisted logic, Each incident had become another reason why I needed to be more responsible, more watchful, more willing to sacrifice myself for the family's reputation. But their money couldn't buy him out of 4 dead bodies and crystal clear video evidence. The prosecution painted a devastating picture of a family so invested in protecting their golden child that they'd created a monster. My testimony about years of being blamed for Jake's actions became central to establishing the pattern of enabling that had led to this tragedy. Did you ever consider that by shielding your brother from consequences, your family might be putting others at risk? The prosecutor asked me. Every day, I answered honestly. But I was 22 years old and had been conditioned since childhood to believe that my job was to absorb blame, not assign it. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, responsible enough, maybe he'd change. The courtroom was silent as I continued. I learned the hard way that you can't love someone into being a better person. You can't sacrifice yourself into fixing someone else's choices. And you definitely can't enable someone into becoming decent. Jake's defense team tried to paint me as a vindictive sister seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. The dash cam, the wire recording, the documentation of his previous incidents, and my own testimony created an airtight case. The Morrison family's victim impact statements were devastating. Emily Morrison's father spoke directly to my parents. Your son didn't just kill my family that night. Your decades of excuses and cover-ups killed them. Every time you paid off a victim, every time you blamed someone else, you taught him that other people's lives don't matter. Jake was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 12 years. The judge specifically noted that the family's pattern of enabling had contributed to the severity of the sentence, but the legal victory was only the beginning of my real revenge. Within days of the sentencing, I went to visit my parents. They'd aged years in the months since the crash, their golden child finally revealed as the monster I'd always known him to be. We need to talk about restitution, I told them calmly. Dad's lawyer had already informed them that the Morrison family's civil suit would likely bankrupt them. The house, the business, the vacation home, all of it would go to pay for the lives Jake had stolen. Sarah, honey, Mom said desperately, maybe you could take out loans, help us keep the house. We're still your family. I looked at this woman who had spent 22 years teaching me that my worth was measured by my willingness to suffer for others' mistakes, who had stood by silently while I was blamed for everything from broken dishes to her son's failing grades, who had never once asked if I was okay, if I needed help, if I deserved better. No, I said simply, you made your choice. Every time you chose him over justice, over honesty, over me. This is the consequence of that choice. Dad tried anger next. You can't just abandon your family. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I laughed bitterly. You mean like the college fund you spent on Jake's legal fees when he got his second DUI? Or like the time you made me pay for his car repairs after he crashed it into Mrs. Peterson's fence? Or maybe you mean the therapy bills you refused to pay because you said I was too sensitive to need help. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. Actually, let's talk about everything you've done for me. I've calculated it. Over the past 4 years, you've cost me approximately $47,000 in money I've had to spend cleaning up Jake's messes. Money I earned working 2 jobs while going to school full-time. The folder contained receipts, bank statements, and a detailed accounting of every cent I'd been forced to pay for Jake's mistakes. Car repairs, legal fees, property damage, and countless smaller amounts I'd handed over to help the family. All money that had ultimately enabled Jake's destructive behavior. I want it back, I said. All of it, with interest. Mom started crying. We don't have that kind of money, especially not now. Then you'll need to figure it out. Just like I had to figure out how to survive on ramen noodles for months after paying for Jake's latest crisis. Just like I had to figure out how to rebuild my credit after you convinced me to co-sign for his apartment lease. What they didn't know was that I'd already solved their money problems, just not in the way they'd hoped. 3 days after the sentencing, I met with the Morrison family's attorney. I'd been following the civil case closely, and I had a proposition. I want to make a statement about the family's assets, I told him. I think there are things you should know about. Over the next hour, I provided detailed information about every hidden account, every shell company, every piece of property my parents had tried to shelter from the lawsuit. I knew about all of it because I'd been the one doing their books for years, another family responsibility that had been dumped on me because I was so good with numbers. I also provided evidence of the previous incidents they'd covered up, including receipts for payments made to victims and documentation of bribes paid to avoid charges. Each piece of evidence I handed over increased the Morrison family's claim and decreased my parents' ability to hide assets. "Why are you doing this?" the attorney asked. "Because 4 people are dead and my family's money was used to ensure their killer never faced consequences until now," I replied. "That money should go to the people who were actually harmed, not to protect the people who caused the harm." The attorney smiled grimly. "This information will ensure the Morrison family gets everything they're entitled to." Everything, as it turned out, was substantial. My parents had hidden nearly $2 million in various accounts and shell companies, all of which became fair game once I provided the documentation. The house, the business, the vacation property, 3 cars, and multiple investment accounts, all of it went to the Morrison family. But I wasn't done. While my parents were reeling from the financial devastation, I made one more move. I contacted every person, every business, every organization that had been impacted by Jake's previous incidents. The cyclist he'd hit and run. The small family business whose storefront he'd destroyed. The school district that had to pay for trauma counseling after his near miss with the bus. Using the money I'd secretly saved over the past 3 months, money my family didn't even know I had. I helped fund a class action lawsuit against my parents for their pattern of enabling and covering up Jake's dangerous behavior. The legal theory was innovative but solid. By repeatedly paying off victims and covering up incidents, my parents had created a public safety hazard. They had knowingly allowed a dangerous individual to continue driving while protecting him from the legal consequences that might have prevented future incidents. The case made national news. Legal experts called it a landmark decision about family liability and enabling behavior. The financial judgment was smaller than the Morrison family's suit, but it was symbolically devastating. More importantly, it established a legal precedent that would prevent other families from using money and influence to shield dangerous relatives from consequences. 6 months after Jake's sentencing, I sat in my new apartment across town reading about my parents' bankruptcy filing in the local newspaper. They'd lost everything and were living in a 1-bedroom rental, both working minimum wage jobs for the first time in their lives. Jake was serving his sentence in a maximum security facility 3 hours away. I'd heard from a cousin that he was not adjusting well to prison life. Apparently, being the smallest fish in a very large pond was quite an adjustment for someone who'd spent his life as the protected golden child. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Sarah, please, we need help. We can't afford groceries this week." I deleted the message without responding. The next text came an hour later. "Your father had a heart episode. We can't afford his medication." I forwarded the message to my cousin Rebecca with a note. "In case you want to help them, I'm not available." Rebecca texted back, "Good for you. Dad told me what they did to you all those years. They made their bed." That evening, I was cooking dinner in my beautiful new kitchen when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my mother standing on my doorstep looking haggard and desperate. I didn't open the door. "Sarah, I know you're in there," she called. "Please, just talk to me." I sat on my couch and continued reading my book. "We're your parents," she said, her voice breaking. "Doesn't that mean anything?" I thought about all the times I'd begged them to love me as much as they loved Jake. All the times I'd asked them to believe me over him. All the times I'd needed them to choose justice over convenience. "We made mistakes," Mom continued, "but we can't change the past. Don't you think we've suffered enough?" Suffered enough. I almost laughed. They'd lost their money and their golden child. I'd lost my life. In my first life, I died alone in a prison cell, abandoned by the family I'd sacrificed everything to protect. I died believing I deserved it, that somehow my existence had been so fundamentally wrong that taking the blame for other people's crimes was the best I could hope for. But this life had taught me something invaluable. Suffering wasn't currency, and martyrdom wasn't love. After an hour, Mom gave up and left. I watched from my window as she walked slowly to the bus stop, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I felt nothing. 2 years later, I was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. The money I'd saved during my 3 months of preparation had grown through careful investments. I'd finished my degree and started my own accounting firm, specializing in helping victims of financial abuse recover hidden assets. My first major case was representing a woman whose ex-husband had hidden millions in divorce proceedings. Using the skills I'd learned uncovering my parents' financial secrets, I'd helped her recover enough money to secure her children's futures. The work was deeply satisfying. Every case was a chance to ensure that victims got justice instead of being told to forgive and forget. I'd also started speaking at conferences about enabling behavior and family scapegoating. My story had become a case study in law schools and psychology programs across the country. During one speaking engagement, a young woman approached me afterward. "I'm living your old life," she said quietly. "I'm always the one who gets blamed when my brother screws up. Last week, he stole money from our grandmother, and somehow, my parents convinced her it was my fault for not watching him closely enough." I gave her my card. "When you're ready to stop being their scapegoat, call me. I can help you document everything and protect yourself legally." She started crying. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," I assured her, "and when you're ready to prove it, you'll know exactly what to do." These conversations happened regularly. My story had inspired hundreds of people to stop accepting blame for other people's choices. Support groups had formed. Legal precedents were being set. The concept of enabling family liability was becoming part of mainstream legal discourse. I'd turned my trauma into a movement. Meanwhile, my original family was learning what consequences actually felt like. Jake had been stabbed in prison 6 months into his sentence. He'd survived, but the experience had apparently been a reality check about his place in the world. According to my cousin, he'd found religion and was now spending his time writing letters to the Morrison family, begging for forgiveness that would never come. My parents had both taken jobs at a call center, working evening shifts for $12 an hour. Dad's heart condition had worsened due to stress, and they were struggling to afford his medications. They'd applied for government assistance and food stamps, programs Dad had spent years railing against as handouts for lazy people. The irony was lost on no one. They'd tried reaching out to me exactly 4 times in 2 years. Each attempt became more desperate and manipulative. First, it was guilt. "We're your parents, you owe us your loyalty." Then it was blame. "Your selfishness destroyed this family." Then it was bargaining. "If you help us just this once, we'll never ask again." Finally, it was threats. "We'll tell everyone what you really did. We'll expose you." That last threat had actually made me laugh. Expose me for what? Telling the truth? Refusing to enable a killer? Declining to sacrifice my future for their comfort? I'd sent them a single response. "Go ahead, the truth is already public record." They never contacted me again. On the 3rd anniversary of the crash, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Emily Morrison's mother, the woman whose family Jake had destroyed. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I wanted you to know that the money from the civil judgment allowed us to establish a foundation in our daughters' names. We provide college scholarships for young women who have overcome family trauma and abuse." The letter continued, "Your courage in telling the truth not only gave us justice for our family, but it prevented your brother from hurting others. You saved lives by refusing to enable him anymore." It ended with an invitation. "We'd be honored if you'd consider joining our board of directors. Your experience with family scapegoating and your work helping other victims makes you exactly the kind of person we need." I called her that same day and accepted. Working with the Morrison Foundation became one of the most meaningful parts of my new life. We funded legal aid for abuse victims, supported research into enabling behaviors, and provided scholarships for young women escaping toxic family dynamics. Every month, I'd read applications from girls who reminded me of my younger self, girls who'd been trained to absorb blame, to minimize their own needs, to sacrifice themselves for family harmony. And every month, we'd award scholarships to young women who were brave enough to choose themselves over their family's dysfunction. 5 years after the crash, I was featured on the cover of a national magazine as one of 40 under 40 people changing the world. The article detailed my work with financial abuse victims and my advocacy for legal reforms around enabling behavior. The photo showed me in my office, surrounded by case files and legal books, with a wall of thank you letters from clients behind me. I looked confident, successful, and genuinely happy. But the most satisfying part of the article wasn't the accolades. It was the final paragraph, which mentioned that my work had directly led to the prosecution of 12 other cases involving family enabling of dangerous behavior. 12 other families who would no longer be able to use money and influence to shield their loved ones from consequences. 12 other potential victims who would be spared because enablers were finally being held accountable. The magazine interview had included one question about my family. Do you ever regret the estrangement from your parents and brother? My answer was printed in bold text as a pull quote. I don't regret choosing truth over comfort, justice over loyalty, or my future over their past. The only thing I regret is how long it took me to realize I had a choice. That same week, I received a friend request on social media from Jake. He was now 6 years into his sentence and apparently had access to supervised internet time. His profile picture showed a man who looked decades older than his 28 years. I declined the request and blocked him immediately. But curiosity got the better of me, and I asked my cousin what she knew about his current situation. He's been trying to get people to visit him, Rebecca told me. He's convinced that if he can just apologize to you, somehow that will fix everything. He keeps talking about making amends and how he's found God. Interesting, I replied. Did you tell him I'm not interested in his spiritual journey? I told him you've moved on with your life and he should focus on serving his sentence, Rebecca said. But Sarah, there's something else. He's been telling people that you framed him, that you somehow orchestrated the whole thing to get revenge. I actually smiled at that. Good. Let him tell people that. It makes him sound even more delusional. Doesn't it bother you that he's trying to rewrite history? Rebecca, I said patiently, he can tell whatever story he wants from his prison cell. The truth is on video, played in court, and preserved in legal records. His delusions can't change facts. What Jake couldn't understand, what my parents had never understood, was that the truth didn't need my protection anymore. It existed independently of their version of events. In my first life, I died believing their lies about me. I'd accepted that I was the problem, the burden, the one who somehow deserved to pay for everyone else's mistakes. But this life had taught me that other people's refusal to accept reality didn't make reality less real. 7 years after the crash, I was invited to give the keynote speech at a national conference on family trauma and abuse. The theme was Breaking Cycles of Enabling and Scapegoating. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of therapists, legal professionals, and survivors, I felt the weight of how far I'd come. People often ask me if I miss my family, I began. If I regret choosing justice over forgiveness, accountability over reconciliation. The room was silent, hanging on every word. What they don't understand is that I didn't choose justice over family. I chose actual love over the performance of loyalty. I chose my authentic self over the role of family scapegoat. I clicked to the next slide, which showed statistics about recidivism among enabled offenders versus those who faced full consequences for their actions. Real love doesn't enable destruction. Real love doesn't demand that victims protect their abusers. Real love doesn't require one person to sacrifice their future for another person's comfort. I advanced to a slide showing the Morrison Foundation's impact numbers. 847 scholarships awarded, 312 legal cases supported, 45 pieces of legislation influenced. This is what happens when we stop enabling destructive behavior. When we hold people accountable instead of making excuses. When we support victims instead of protecting perpetrators. The final slide was a photo of me with the Morrison family at the Foundation's latest scholarship ceremony. We were surrounded by young women who had escaped toxic family situations and were now thriving in college and careers. My brother is serving a 25-year sentence for killing 4 people. My parents lost everything when their pattern of enabling was exposed in court. And I've never been happier or more at peace. The applause was thunderous. During the quanda, a young man raised his hand. Don't you think everyone deserves forgiveness? Don't you think holding grudges just hurts you in the end? It was a question I'd heard countless times, always from people who had never been in my situation. Forgiveness and accountability aren't mutually exclusive, I replied. I've forgiven my family for the damage they did to me. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean enabling further harm. I paused, thinking of all the victims who'd been told to forgive and forget while their abusers continued hurting others. My brother forgave himself for every drunk driving incident before the fatal one. My parents forgave themselves for every cover-up, every bribe, every time they chose convenience over justice. Their forgiveness of themselves is exactly what enabled them to keep escalating their harmful behavior. The young man looked uncomfortable, but I continued. Real accountability means accepting that some choices have permanent consequences. My brother will never get those 25 years back. The Morrison family will never get their loved ones back. And I will never get the childhood or young adulthood I deserved. I smiled slightly. But I got something better. I got a life where I'm not responsible for other people's choices, where my worth isn't measured by my willingness to suffer, and where truth matters more than family comfort. After the speech, dozens of people approached me with their own stories. Adult children who'd been blamed for their siblings' addiction, daughters who'd been expected to manage their father's rage, sons who'd been scapegoated for their mother's mental illness. Each conversation reinforced what I'd learned. The decision to stop enabling abuse is rarely understood by the people who benefit from the enabling. But it's always understood by the people who've been harmed by it. 10 years after the crash, I married Dr. James Chen, a trauma therapist I'd met through my advocacy work. Our wedding was small and intimate, attended by chosen family rather than biological family. Rebecca was my maid of honor. The Morrison family attended, as did dozens of colleagues and clients whose lives had been impacted by my work. There were no empty chairs for absent family members, no moments of silence for relationships that could have been. Instead, there was pure joy, unmarred by obligation or guilt. During his toast, James said something that perfectly captured my journey. Sarah didn't just survive her family's dysfunction. She transformed it into a force for justice that has helped hundreds of people. That's not spite or revenge, that's alchemy. We honeymooned in Italy, and I felt the profound peace that comes from living an authentic life. I wasn't performing the role of dutiful daughter, long-suffering sister, or family scapegoat. I was simply myself, someone who had chosen truth over comfort and built a meaningful life on that foundation. While we were traveling, I received a letter that had been forwarded from my office. It was from Jake, now 10 years into his sentence. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. Sarah, it began, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I put you through, what our parents put you through, and why you did what you did. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing his journey through addiction recovery, therapy, and what he called authentic accountability. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he wrote near the end. I know I don't deserve it, and I know it's not owed to me. I'm just asking that you know that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry it took 4 people dying and 10 years in prison for me to see it. I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. James found me that evening on our hotel balcony, looking out over the Mediterranean. Everything okay? He asked. Perfect, I replied, and meant it. Jake's acknowledgement of the truth was satisfying, but it wasn't necessary for my peace. I'd built my happiness on a foundation of my own choices, not on other people's recognition of their mistakes. 15 years after the crash, my book, Scapegoat No More, Breaking Free from Family Enabling, became a bestseller. It was part memoir, part legal guide, and part psychological analysis of how families create and maintain scapegoat dynamics. The book tour took me to 43 cities, where I spoke to thousands of people who saw their own experiences reflected in my story. During one event, a woman in her 60s approached me with tears in her eyes. I've spent my whole life taking the blame for my brother's addiction, she said. My parents are both dead now, but I'm still sending money to clean up his messes. After hearing your story, I realize I don't have to keep doing this. These conversations happened in every city. Adult children who'd been trained to absorb blame, to minimize their own needs, to sacrifice themselves for family dysfunction. Each person who chose to break the cycle was a victory that went far beyond my own story. The book also attracted criticism from people who believed family loyalty should override all other considerations. I received angry letters from enablers who saw my story as a threat to their own systems of dysfunction. One particularly nasty review accused me of destroying the sacred bonds of family for personal gain. I responded in a follow-up interview, "There's nothing sacred about bonds built on abuse, lies, and scapegoating. Real family bonds are built on love, honesty, and mutual respect. What I destroyed wasn't family, it was a system of exploitation that masqueraded as family." 20 years after the crash, I was invited to speak at Jake's prison as part of their Victim Impact program. It would be the first time I'd seen him since the trial. I almost declined, but ultimately decided that seeing him might provide closure for both of us. The man who sat across from me in the prison visiting room was unrecognizable. 20 years of incarceration had aged him dramatically, but more than that, he carried himself completely differently. Gone was the arrogant, entitled young man who'd expected me to clean up his messes. In his place was someone who seemed genuinely broken and rebuilt from the ground up. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I replied honestly. We talked for an hour. He told me about his journey through recovery, his work with other inmates struggling with addiction, and his complete acceptance of responsibility for the choices that had led him to prison. "I know this doesn't change anything," he said near the end of our visit, "but I want you to know that what you did, refusing to take the blame, probably saved other lives. I was spiraling completely out of control, and if I'd gotten away with that crash, I would have killed again." It was a sobering admission, but one that validated everything I'd believed about the importance of accountability. "I also want you to know," he continued, "that I never blamed you for not helping Mom and Dad after I was arrested. You didn't owe them anything after what they put you through." I looked at this man who had once been the center of our family's dysfunction, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not pity for his circumstances. Those were the natural consequences of his choices. But pity for the person he could have been if our parents had loved him enough to hold him accountable from the beginning. "I hope you find peace, Jake," I said as I prepared to leave. "I have," he replied. "Finally." As I walked out of the prison that day, I realized that our conversation had given me something I hadn't known I needed. Confirmation that I'd made the right choice 20 years ago. Jake would spend 5 more years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. Our parents had both died in the intervening years. Dad from a heart attack, Mom from cancer, without ever acknowledging their role in creating the monster their golden child had become. I'd attended neither funeral. Now, at 42 years old, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined in my first incarnation. I had a loving marriage, meaningful work, financial security, and the profound peace that comes from living authentically. And more importantly, I'd helped create a world where other scapegoats had legal recourse, where enabling behavior carried real consequences, and where families couldn't use money and influence to shield dangerous members from accountability. The Morrison Foundation had grown into a national organization. We'd helped pass legislation in 37 states, making it easier to prosecute cases involving family enabling of dangerous behavior. We'd also established a network of legal clinics specializing in helping abuse survivors recover hidden assets and document patterns of financial exploitation. But perhaps most satisfying was our scholarship program. We'd now awarded over 2,000 scholarships to young women escaping toxic family situations. Many of them had gone on to become lawyers, therapists, social workers, and advocates themselves. The cycle was being broken, one brave decision at a time. On the 25th anniversary of the crash, I visited the Morrison Family Memorial for the first time. It was a beautiful garden with 4 trees planted in memory of the family members Jake had killed. Standing there, I thought about the butterfly effect of that night. Jake's choice to drive drunk had killed 4 innocent people. My parents' choice to enable him had made that tragedy possible. And my choice to tell the truth had prevented future tragedies while creating a movement for accountability. Every choice had consequences that rippled outward, affecting countless other lives. As I placed flowers at the memorial, I felt the presence of the Morrison family, not as ghosts, but as the reason why my work mattered. Their deaths had meaning because they'd led to changes that protected other families. That evening, James and I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset. We'd built a beautiful life together, complete with adopted twin daughters who would grow up knowing they were valued for who they were, not for their willingness to absorb blame for others. Any regrets? James asked, as he often did on significant anniversaries. I thought about my first life, where I died young and alone, convinced I deserved to pay for crimes I didn't commit. I thought about my family of origin, who'd lost everything because they'd confused enabling with love. Just one, I said finally. I regret that it took dying and being reborn for me to learn that I deserved better. James squeezed my hand. But you learned it eventually, and you've helped thousands of other people learn it too. As darkness fell, I reflected on the truth I discovered through this incredible second chance. Redemption isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about choosing to break destructive patterns, even when that choice comes with a cost. My family had taught me that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant silence, and that family came first no matter what harm that family caused. But I'd learned that real love requires accountability, that true loyalty includes holding people responsible for their choices, and that family should be defined by care and respect rather than blood and obligation. 25 years after refusing to take the blame for my brother's car crash, I was exactly where I belonged, free from their dysfunction, surrounded by people who valued truth over comfort, and using my experience to help others escape the roles they'd been assigned in their family's toxic dynamics. Jake was serving the consequences of his choices. My parents had faced the results of their enabling, and I was living the life I'd always deserved but never believed was possible. The truth had set me free, and I'd used that freedom to help set others free as well. That was the real victory. Not just escaping the role of family scapegoat, but transforming that experience into a force for justice that would outlast all of us. As I headed inside to check on my daughter's homework, I smiled at the thought of the women they would become. Strong, authentic, unafraid to tell the truth even when it was difficult. They would never know what it felt like to be a scapegoat because I would never allow anyone to treat them that way. The cycle was finally permanently broken,